Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 745. Today we're going to talk about Ark Nova. This is being brought over by Capstone Games. I believe this was an Essen release at the end of 2021. It's now hitting the States. This is a 1 to 4 player game. It is a card game but also a board game, kind of a mixture of the two. It will often be compared to Terraforming Mars, which we'll talk about at the end of the video. This is, like I said, a 1 to 4 player game. Players will be building and managing a zoo, as well as also some of, let's say, the extracurricular activities that a good zoo will be involved in, which is really cool, spoiler alert. So players are going to be kind of drafting cards, playing cards, building and managing tiles on a tile board, and growing different enclosures and different pavilions and kiosks and all those kind of things that go into a zoo, but also partnering with other zoos and other continents, things like that, going on like kind of conservation projects or sending their assistants along to kind of do that kind of stuff. So let's take a look down at the board. I'm going to give you kind of a high level overview. There's a couple of really good how to play videos out there already, so I'm not going to go really exhaustive, but we'll go down to the table. I'll tell you what's going on, then we'll come back up here and I'll tell you what I think. Okay, you can see I've got a bunch of stuff set out here. I basically cleaned up after my last solo play of it. A couple of things to note here. Obviously we have here the main player board. I didn't clean up everything. You can see I've got here different enclosures and stuff like that that I've used to build my zoo. So there'll be different types of animals that need different sized enclosures. You'll be building these enclosures and then filling them. When you fill the enclosure, you'll flip it over like that, so you know you've got a particular type of animal, maybe even a group of different animals in particular enclosures there. Some other things going on, which we'll talk about in a minute. The main thing to know about the player area here are these action cards. Now you always set the game up on the level 1 side. You can see this is a level 1 animals action. There's a level 2 animals action, so you can upgrade these. You always put the animal 1 in the first slot here. You can see 1 through 5. And then you'll randomly kind of shuffle them up and then deal these out randomly, so everybody might have a little bit of a different startup there. You've got little agents and assistants over here. You always start with 1 available, 25 money. You can also collect these little X markers here, which are used to boost up your actions, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then off to the side, you'll be generally playing these animal cards, some of these sponsor cards, some other bonus cards and stuff like that. When you play an animal card, you can see here the size of the animal. So you can see this needs a size 4 enclosure, which is the one we just flipped over. So that requires that. But there'll be some other kind of requirements and kind of funky little combo things you can do with these animal cards, which we'll talk about. Now up here, we have the main kind of board here that all the players will be interacting with. And first thing to note here are there are 2 score tracks. So you can see we have this score track here. This is called your appeal. So let's just zoom in a little bit there. These are like your tickets. You can see they look like little tickets. So these are kind of like your normal victory points, let's call them that. But they're basically the amount of tickets, the amount of appeal, the popularity of your zoo. So you're going to score those and move those up. But at the top of the board, you can see these larger green spaces here, and you'll be moving this colored marker up as well. These are the conservation points. You can see those kind of go up, up, and up. And then the spaces get a little bit wider up here. Now the game will end when, let's just say it happens over here, the appeal marker of one player gets to the point where it's in the same or past the conservation area there. So once that happens, that player will have played their last turn. Everybody else gets 1 more turn. And then the way that the game is scored or decided is you might have some extra bonus points to buy some bonus cards. Let's say we get a couple more conservation points for the yellow player there. And then maybe they get a couple of more tickets, so they go to here. So you'll take and move that yellow marker there, which you can't really see behind that giant deck of cards, and then you'll kind of count the number of spaces from the lowest spot in that area to there, and kind of the difference there, that positive difference of points, which in this case is 12 points. So there's a 12-point difference there between those 2 spots. That would be how many points effectively yellow scores. So whoever has the largest positive difference, it is possible to get negative points if you don't get your markers wrapped around meeting each other. Whoever has the largest positive difference will be the winner of the game. So you're kind of scoring 2 different aspects. One is the tickets, the turnstiles, the popularity of your zoo, and then kind of balancing that with kind of giving back to the scientific community with your conservation points and things like that. Then of course here we have this sort of giant display of cards here. These will be available to be grabbed, and there's a huge deck of cards that you will never go all the way through in a single game. Maybe in a 4-player game you get, most of the way through it. And then a discard pile over here. Now there's one other track over here. As you can see, this is your reputation track. So it becomes easier to get access to the cards down this line as you move your reputation marker up. And then you can more easily draw those cards instead of blindly drawing off the top of the deck or doing what's called a snap action. Now a snap action lets you grab any card here, but it's a little bit harder to do, which we'll get to that in a minute. So that's where a lot of your cards are going to come from, either to display there or of course this big deck of cards there. You'll start the game with 8 cards, discard down to 4, and there's basically 3 distinct types of cards, which we'll just go over really quickly. So first here you can see the animal cards. This will show you the type of enclosure, the size of enclosure, the minimum size of enclosure, because you could put it in a bigger one. And then a little bit of an environmental effect, so you need that enclosure to be next to a water space. Here's the amount of money it will cost. And then this is a requirement. Now this particular thing means you need to have a partner with the matching continent. So you need to have a partner zoo over in Africa in this case to get access to this pygmy hippopotamus. And this is showing kind of the type, where it's from, and kind of the type of animal. When you play the card, you do kind of an action here, a little special ability, and then you'll score that many tickets, that many appeal points. So there's a lot going on there. And then you also have sponsor cards, which you'll play, and these are going to be little special bonus effects that you can play. They don't really have a cost, so to speak, but there is kind of a requirement here that you have to pay, which I'll show you in a minute. And sometimes these will have end-game bonuses. Sometimes you get effects when you play them immediately, or sometimes they'll live in your display and you get triggered effects as you play them. And then you've also got here these kind of conservation projects here that you can draw out of the deck. Now there's some that are out of a specific deck to sort of seed the board at the beginning of the game, but players can actually draw these into your hands, and you can see there's different requirements for it. So if you release one animal with the Asia icon, so you can see there's the Asia icon, which is different than Africa, and then you get conservation points there by playing that. And then other players can actually piggyback on top of that as well. And the conservation cards are going to go over there. You can see at the bottom there's some that are seeded at the start of the game and some others that have been effectively played during the game and scored as well. And there's some other actions there which we'll talk about in a minute. But let's look at our player actions. So you basically only have 5 choices on your turn for a player action. And like I said here, you start with the animals here and then do them randomly. So we're just going to work left to right here. So animals, very effectively, if you play this action, then you can play a number of animal cards equal to the slot that it's in. So you can see it starts as slot 1. So you can play 0 animals there, so you can't really do anything. Now, slot 2, if it was in here, you could play 1 animal, or if it was all the way at slot 5, you could play 2 animals. So what happens when you play a card, let's say we decided to do this action. We'll do that, we'll do what it says, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then you'll shift this all the way down here to slot 1, everything will shift up. So you have this kind of rotating, sort of delayed kind of cool down recharge effect on these different actions here. And so getting back to the animals here, when you do this action, you could play a certain number of animal cards from your hand. Like I said, paying the cost. If you have any other requirements underneath there, you've got to satisfy those. Sometimes they'll look for certain, icons in your display. So you might need some of these science icons, or like I was showing you before with the partner zoo. If you have the partner zoo there might be some other things like that. You might need to have already played a bird, and it'll have the bird icon there, or something like that. So you play that, and then you can play the number of those. And then, like I said before, these can get upgraded. And so you can see, you can start playing 2 animals. One is only at the 3 spot. And if it's at the 5 spot, you actually get an influence, or excuse me, a reputation, and you can play 2. So these will get better as well. So that's playing the animal card. Now here is the cards action. And here you can see it says break 2, and then based on where it's at, you can draw a certain number of cards. So if it was in the slot 2 here, you can draw 1 card. Now you can always draw where your reputation marker is and to the left. So I could draw any of those cards there, or I can always draw off the top of the deck. Or if it was in slot 5, I could draw 3 and I'd have to discard 1. You don't have to discard from what you drew. You could discard from your hand. Or if it's in slot 5, you can snap a card. And that's, like I said, where you can take any card you want from the display. Doesn't matter where your reputation marker is at. If it's all the way up here in slot 5, then you can snap a card. Now, we skipped over a part here. It says break 2. So let's take a, what does break mean? So whenever the card says break, you're going to break a certain amount. So in this case, it was break 2. We're going to take this break marker, which starts at the player count indicator there. So 2, 3, and 4. In this case, we just move it 2 spots down. Now, the turns of the game are just going to keep going around the table until somebody triggers this break marker to move over to here. At that point, play will freeze, and then we'll do a couple of cleanup things. The first thing that will happen is the person that triggered that will get one of these X tokens. Now these can be used to beef up the power of one of the actions that you played. So let's take a real quick look at that. So if we really wanted to use this build action, and we didn't really want to use this association action to get it out of the way to do this, we can spend this to beef that up. If we really wanted to get that into the 5 slot, you can spend any number of these to beef up an action. You can have at most 5 of these, kind of have a hand limit of those. And you can get those other ways, not just by triggering a break. Now, a couple other things will happen. There is a hand limit. So most of the time players will have a hand limit of 3. That can get increased to 5. So you have to discard down to your hand limit. Discard any of these little bonus tokens and stuff, which I'll talk about. And then you kind of reset that worker placement board, which you can see here. And that worker placement board is over here. And we'll basically refill any of these tokens that might have been taken. Any workers that are placed there will get pulled off and back to the player board. You discard the left 2 cards from the little row there. Those will go away. And then players will collect income. And that will be based on where they're at on this track. So you can see right here, if they were in this spot, then they would collect $33 or money. And there'll be some other things that might trigger that, you know, that you collect income from, some cards, maybe certain ways you've played buildings on your board and other things like that. So you collect income and then you just keep playing. You'll reset the break token and then play will move around the table clockwise, and you just keep going until the end of the game and somebody's markers pass each other, and you keep taking breaks as those are triggered. So the next action we'll talk about here is the sponsors action. So you have 2 choices here. Here you can break X and then gain that much money. So you can see this is in the 3 spot. So we can move the break marker 3 spots and then collect 3 money. That's not really optimal. Or you can play a sponsor card here. So you can see here, we have a sponsor card of 3. So obviously you could play a sponsor card of 3 or less. In this case, we could have played this card. Like I said, these have all kinds of crazy abilities and stuff like that. Next here, we can build a building. And so you can build a building of size X. So again, down here, size 4 or less. And you're going to pay 2 money per space. So if you wanted to do the maximum you could do there, build a 4 space building, which we showed you at the beginning there. You can build that. That's going to cost you 8 money. And then you will put it onto your board like so. Now, when you put your first building on the board, you just have to touch an edge space. After that, you have to touch a pre-existing building. So here we could, of course, put that in this spot like so. And then you put it, in this case, sort of unfilled. So it's an unclosed enclosure there. You've got actually plain animal there. And like I said, flip it over. Now, it's worth noting at this point that there are a variety of these boards, and they are double-sided. Here you can see kind of the starting board is map A. And then on the back of this, we've got another one. And these will have different layouts, different special abilities, different sort of income tracks here on the left. The thing to know about map A, which I would recommend you for your first play, is you will start with a level 3 building here. So all the players, if you're all playing with map A, will grow out of this. It's got a kiosk already printed on it and so on. And then as you cover up these different icons, certain abilities and effects will trigger. You will have needed to upgrade, for example, your build action onto its level side to cover up such a spot there. And other certain things on your board here will need to be upgraded. Not only like this one here for the association action, which we'll talk about, not only for the special ability, but also just to get access to those extra spots. So anyway, that's the building action. And finally, we'll talk about the association action. That's when you use, I think I've called them everything except associates. You use assistants or agents or associates, as they're called in this game. And you will take them, and here you start with 1 available, and then you can lock them as you go through the course of the game. And once you unlock the last one, you'll get 2 conservation points. And you will go over to the worker placement board, and you'll be able to grab some of these tokens, fulfill different conservation projects, and be able to give donations and so on. And if we just take a quick peek up here, you can see, okay, so the 2 slot, you could get 2 reputation, the 3 slot, You get partner zoo. Here's where you get some of the different university partnerships, which will just give you some different icons. The fifth and final slot is where you'll be able to do some of the conservation projects, and from there you can see you have different requirements here. So let's just zoom in on this guy. So it requires, focus up, requires predator icons in your zoo. So in this case, if you had 2, 4, or 5, you would get that many conservation points. So you take a look at all the animal icons and maybe some of the icons from some of your partner zoos and so on. And then you'll take a cube off the left side of your board here. You'll have extra cubes for marking all kinds of special abilities, but as you take cubes off of here, you will get an immediate bonus for these, so in this case 5 money. Place that onto the conservation project. You can only put 1 cube on each card, so you can only do it once. And then now you have unlocked a little bit of extra income in this case, so you get extra 5 money, or maybe you'll get like free level 2 buildings, or you can snap a card. So every time you do a break, you can do these, or you can get kind of bigger immediate bonuses. These won't be recurring, but they'll be a little bit more bigger and immediate, like unlock a new assistant or associate or whatever they're called, and $12 and 3 the X markers and so on. So you put those out there. And really that's kind of the basic gist of the game. There's a lot of interplay between the different cards, you know, the different animals will work different ways. There's a lot of special buildings, so you can build like some buildings here. There's a lot of special ones. Let's show a couple here. So you've got like a petting zoo building, and then you've got a reptile building and an aviary here for birds. And so you can actually place these on your board. Let's try to place it legally here if we can. And then you'll start to place cubes in here instead of flipping over buildings. And then those animals will have kind of a different rule here. Let me just show you this before we go to my talking head, because this is an important piece. This is the best example here I can find in the deck. So you've got this Andean condor, right? Well, you can see here, you need to place it in a size 5 building, which is the biggest one, or if you have an aviary there, then it will only take up 1 slot. And some of these actually take up 0. So in that case, you just take a cube and move it over there and place it in there. There's a couple of little rules there, but you can see like this one, it needs another bird to already be there and so on. But that's kind of what some of these cool specialty buildings are, is you can squeeze more animals into kind of a specialized enclosure other than hogging up so much space in your zoo. So that's an important thing to kind of keep in mind there. But that's pretty much the gist of the game. Okay, so that is Ark Nova. So let me go through my 3 pillars of review here. We'll start with player count. Now I've only played this solo and 2 players. I have not played it 3 or 4 players. And I will say I do not think I'd really want to play it with 4, to be honest with you. Because the game, it definitely takes, I wouldn't say exponentially longer, but sort of relatively longer based on the player count from what I've seen. I would play it 3 player. I think as long as everybody else had played it, I'd be a little bit like reticent to play with somebody that was brand new. I mean, I would, I'm not a jerk, but that wouldn't be my favorite thing in the world. I will say though, I like 2 player a lot better than solo. Solo's like pretty good. There's some things I like about solo, but the way the game sort of paces out, I think solo is kind of like hard mode, because the AI here doesn't really do too much. It just kind of counts down turns in between breaks. And it really just has like the pedal to the metal. Like you have no time to really try to set up your engine as best as you can. It's really, really rough. Now with the 2-player game, I've seen that it's a little bit more, I don't know, even keel. So you kind of run into ways, before I get too much in the extra review part, you kind of will run into ways where you kind of both kind of get stuck at certain points. So it seems to me to kind of balance out. I've only played 2-player twice. I played solo probably 4 times. So in the 2 plays solo, it seemed like both of us got kind of like, you get kind of in a jam and then you get some cards that helped or something and then you can get out of it. Whereas in the solo game, like it doesn't care. It's just like I'm plowing through and you're like, wait, like I never really have a good set of hands here, or you're triggering that break so fast and it's just really hurt me. So solo I think is harder. I did like it though, and it has a cool kind of pseudo campaign thing going on where you kind of play through the deck without reusing any cards that you saw. And that kind of reveals some things too about kind of the luck of the card draw by playing that. So anyway, I would be down to play it with 3, especially if everybody had played it. There's a little bit more interplay in the pacing of the game, really is the trick there. Now I will say there's some interactive cards sort of like, I wouldn't even call them interactive, I call them attack cards, which maybe in a 3 or 4 player game they're okay because you could kind of rein in a leader a little bit because they're always attacking the leader. I found in a 2-player game, we started playing with them and then we were like, even like with the first card, we were like, no, it's this doesn't feel right in a 2-player game because you're just like, oh, you have 1 extra ticket point than me and then I'm hammering you and it's like, well, come on. I mean, the game is kind of rough on you anyway, like it can be a little bit brutal in terms of in trying to put together some kind of combo or something, and then it's like, you're hitting me over the head now? It's like, no, we just said no, screw it. We'll take those out. But the thing to know about those cards is those attack cards give you an option where if you don't want to play with the attack powers, use this alternative action instead. That's really cool. I really like that. That's a neat way to do it. Like I said, maybe in a 4-player game, it'd be a good way of reining in kind of a runaway leader, which could be an issue here with this game. I mean, it kind of is indicative of this kind of genre. It's not really anything special about this. I'd hesitate to call it a runaway leader problem with this game, but you can definitely get somebody that gets ahead of you and stuff because they drew better cards and are better than you. So I could see doing that in like a 4-player game especially. But it's nice they give you the option to get out of it. Now let's talk about play time. Well, I already kind of talked about that. The solo games I can get done in less than an hour at this point. Especially if I'm really focused and I don't really get too stuck. Even solo can go a little bit over an hour if I'm like really, just really stuck on stuff. The 2-player games have been about under 2 hours, I would say. I wasn't really having a stopwatch. It was about an hour and a half, maybe a little bit more, feels like. So I would expect, again, the 3 and the 4-player games to go a lot longer. And let's see what the box actually says on it. Let me just take a quick look here. I should have did this before I started talking. It says 90 to 150 minutes, and so that's about 2.5 hours. I don't know, 4-player game, especially with new players, I think would go up to 3. The play time's not really going to scale because it seems like when you take breaks, everybody's kind of taking breaks at the same time anyway. So like you're still going to get about the same amount of actions per player, per round of breaks and stuff. So it's kind of, I think 4 players are going to push up to 3 hours. Okay, so now what is this game like? And I mentioned it at the beginning. This is going to, I think, fairly be compared to Terraforming Mars. Now there's another game that also gets compared, I think, not necessarily unfairly, but wrongly in a way, even though I've done it. It's Underwater Cities also gets compared to Terraforming Mars. Now this is more like Terraforming Mars than Underwater Cities is, for sure. Underwater Cities, I think, just kind of happens to have in common sort of a board game plus big card, effects kind of thing going on. This is a little bit more like Terraforming Mars. And I've been really thinking about it and I actually fired up the Terraforming Mars app earlier today because I haven't played it in a little while. And I was like, gosh, I can't really seem to figure out if I like this more than Terraforming Mars or Terraforming Mars more than this. Because I really did like the original Terraforming Mars that came out, I think, 4 years ago now. And there's some things that this game does that I like better than Terraforming Mars. And there's some stuff that I like in Terraforming Mars a little bit better, actually. So the TLDR, if you don't want to watch the rest of this rambly review, is if you really like Terraforming Mars, I would say I recommend this because it's kind of a different thing. Like if you're really into it, like you really like it, this is a little bit more the same kind of thing, but it's a lot different in some other ways. So I think if you're looking for something kind of different there, and I think you would really enjoy this. Especially if you like the theme, because I really enjoyed this theme. Now, if you haven't played Terraforming Mars or don't own it, and you ask me which one would you choose, I don't know. I'm going to try to explain to you the differences in the next couple of minutes, and then maybe you can figure it out. So the things that Terraforming Mars does that I like better than this game is this game, and this is a 2 sides of a coin thing. This to me is a much tighter game and a much more unforgiving game than Terraforming Mars. Now, just for an example, Terraforming Mars, every round will kind of just cough up some cards for you that you can buy. So you draw like 4 cards, and then you can pay like $3 a card and get some stuff. And you have a bunch of cards. You can have a ton of cards in your hand. I forget what the hand limit is in that game. But I think it's 10 cards. Yeah, I think so. And so you can have a big old hand of cards. Now this game, the hand limit to start the game is 3 cards, which actually can be a giant pain in the butt at the beginning of the game. So there's one of the universities that increases your hand size to 5. It's not always the best call to get that early in the game, but often I think it's the best call to get it early in the game, because when the break comes and you have to discard cards in your hand, you're like, I don't want to discard any of these, and you only have 4 cards in your hand, for goodness sake. So you've got to get rid of one of these that you were like trying to set up a combo, because the game has blessed you with a combo, which is not always going to do. And so it's like, why are you making me get rid of this card, you jerk? So I like some parts of it that are tighter, which I'll talk about, but I like in Terraforming Mars where it gives you some more options and stuff like that. You don't feel so constricted by the cards and stuff and how they kind of come out. All right. So that's the main thing I like about Terraforming Mars more than this game. Now, on the other side of that coin, when you get towards the end of this game, it gets really crunchy. So all those actions that you're cycling back and forth, you got to be really keyed in on that stuff, because that really is going to make or break your game, I think, through the course of the game, but especially towards the end, because you're going to be really trying to eke out the maximum power you can get out of those actions, because you're like, I just need this to get this building down, and I can get the other turn, I can get the double animals, and then I scored a bunch of animal points and trigger this ability, which make me move down this track and give the conservation point. So the end of the game is really, really cool. Like, it just comes to like this smashing, like, you know, just great sort of you know, peak of impact. Sorry, I was struggling for the words there. But in Terraforming Mars, one thing it never seems to do that for me. The games, I really like Terraforming Mars, but at the end of the game, you're kind of like just turning the crank on your engine a little bit, which I think some people will like. And you're kind of turning the crank on this whole resource conversion thing, which that I'm kind of sick of in games, although we haven't really seen that many games. But there was like a streak of a couple of years there where it was like, convert this resource into that resource, and this resource back into this resource, and that one into that one. And so that is not as satisfying as a thing, whereas this is a much tighter, much more unforgiving end game. But I like that here. And so the other thing that I like here, and this is kind of either or. So this one, you're playing all your buildings on your own player board. So you have your own little zoo, you're kind of growing it out. The different player boards are really neat. I really like that aspect of the game. You know, definitely play with the basic one for your first game, but then I would say move quickly into some of those others, because there's some cool special abilities on there. They give you some kind of outs as far as finding combos. So you're like, okay, I got this thing, so I can kind of start to work my strategy early in the game and get that going. And then some of the different like income tracks on the left side of your board are going to be a little bit different. I just found it really satisfying to play with some of those extra boards. Now in Terraforming Mars, you're all playing on the same big, you know, planet of Mars. So I do kind of like that about that game, where because I tend to like this kind of thing in a game where you're all sort of playing next to each other. You're bumping into each other, getting triggers of extra, you know, money and stuff off each other. And you're kind of communally working together, but in a competitive sense. You know, you think of a game like Brass or Barrage, that kind of vibe. That kind of happens in Terraforming Mars. Whereas here, it's not like that. And actually, that was one of the things that sort of made me look at the game and be like, I'm probably not going to like this, because it's got this sort of Tetris thing going on, and it's a zoo. And I'm not really going to like a zoo theme, but I really do like the zoo theme, which I'll talk about in a second. But I was not really into playing like a yet another, you know, this is not an Uwe Rosenberg game, but not another Uwe Rosenberg Tetris game. But I really like what they did here with that balancing between, you know, working out your zoo and working out the logistics of your zoo, because you can put in those kiosks and those pavilions, and those are like where the visitors will visit, and they'll give you extra tickets or extra income and all that stuff, working out those logistics and getting over to the bonus spots, and that whole thing is really interesting and cool. But you have to balance that with your sort of scientific contribution. And I'm like, yeah, okay, now we're talking here. Now we're just having a zoo with a bunch of animals that don't want to be there, and just scoring that and like being all, hey, we have a zoo, so we can go look at these creatures that don't want to be behind cages. But we're leveraging our zoo. We're introducing the public to these creatures. We're educating them about that, you know, and then we're also giving back and working with partner zoos in the scientific community, doing studies, sending our assistants and stuff out on our research, our associates, I should say. that's a really cool theme. That's what zoos are for. They should be for. Yeah, so that was like, oh, okay, it's got this little angle here. I really like that. That's a really cool thing. And that actually works very, very well. And so that kind of thematic difference from Terraforming Mars, where everybody's kind of, you know, coexisting on Mars, everybody's trying to terraform it, you know, but also be kind of the winner and be the richest and have the best, you know, make all the money. This is cool because it really fits the theme of the idea of a good zoo, right? Because you're trying to build a zoo that's laid out in a cool way, and you get all the bonuses and all that. And you try to also give back to the scientific community. You're partnering with zoos and stuff like that. I really like the artwork and some of the abilities and stuff about how certain animals will kind of want to live together and all that stuff. And some of the different effects and things are kind of interesting about how you can have different sort of scientists as the different sponsors come in. So not only do you send your assistants and stuff off on different expeditions or scientific endeavors, but you have different types of scientists coming into the zoo. You know, like geologists and all this other kind of thing. So it's this big sort of feeling of like, you know, the scientific community kind of working together, and it really you know, hits that vibe right. And I like that they use photographs in here too, because like it looks like real scientists and real, you know, animals, and it's all the real stuff. So that's really cool. I like that they did not do artwork, because it feels a little bit more grounded to me in that way. So again, the kind of blending of everything like that is really, really neat. And to me, it actually has a better feel thematically, a little slight edge for me than Terraforming Mars, because of the sort of spatial zoo management stuff. There's a lot of little tricks and things that you can do there where you have, you know, you can put certain animals together, and I showed you kind of the aviary, but there's a lot of other little combos like that. Like you've got the grazing animals and animals from different continents and things like that. So sometimes you have to release them back out, or, you know, give them to a different zoo with some of the different cards. So just that churn of figuring out the balance between making kind of a popular zoo that sells tickets, you know, versus the zoo that, you know, contributes to science. That's just a really, really neat thing. Whereas in Terraforming Mars, the whole like temperature, oxygen thing, it does, like I said, at the end of the game, it gets a little bit organ grindy and a little bit too abstract in that regard, or it does not feel necessarily tied together. But the brutality of this, in a way, the way everything's so interconnected, really pushes that across the finish line as far as the theme goes. Now, that also makes the game pretty like difficult, I think. I think this is a little bit more difficult of a game than Terraforming Mars. Not in terms of complexity, but in terms of being able to play it well and not get so hosed up by the cards. Now, Terraforming Mars has the same problem where, you know, you can have a really good combo of cards land in your lap, and you're just going to do better than somebody else of, you know, equal skill or even better skill sometimes. And this has that same issue. And this one, and they both have the same issue where there's like this has the three types of cards, whereas Terraforming Mars has a little bit of an out in that way where it's like you have kind of different types, but you can also always kind of pay money for most of the cards. And then certain of the resource types will make those cards cheaper, but if you have enough money, you can still pay for them. Whereas these types don't really crossbreed. Like the sponsor cards, you know, they don't cost money. Your sponsor action just has to be up there. And the conservation cards, those are a specific type of thing. You have to do the association action. And then all the animals, of course, cost money, and the buildings cost money. So the cards, like from a resource perspective, are not that integrated. Now, I don't think that's a problem or anything, you know, it's fine design-wise, but it's just like harder to get them all to kind of work together. And so you can have sometimes that display row in the middle be like, why is it all sponsors? I need animals. Okay. I mean, I especially need gorillas or whatever, or primates, I should say. But it would be nice just to get an animal. So you get states like that, but they kind of affect everybody the same. So like I said, in a two-player game, it's like not a big deal because you're like, okay, maybe you need 5 sponsors. I don't think so. But, you know, you can take one. But it kind of, the pace of the game matches and loops better between the players. It seems to be more in sync. Whereas if you play single player, like I said, the AI doesn't care. It's like, well, too bad. I'm just going to keep cruising along like I drew every card I needed. I was like, what? So yeah. So you can have those moments of frustration and like I said, you can get stuck a little bit easier in this game than you can Terraforming Mars. Or even like Underwater Cities or any of these kind of games like that rely on card draw. It seems like you can get stuck a little bit more here, and there's just about every time I played it, that action selection row, after I do like 1 or 2 actions, I'm like, oh, I did that completely wrong. I should have did it in a different order. And that's a good sign, because you're like, well, next time I do it, I'm gonna do better. But it seems to happen to me all the time. And I'm even if I win, it's like, I still should have did that a little bit better. So that cycle of action stuff is really cool and really hard and really difficult. And that's going to really cause a lot of AP, and that's going to cause a lot of the time to, increase the playtime of your game. And plus, not having cards maybe that are really great and easy to, parse and play. But I recommend it. I think I would give this one like 3 plays of it. And I would say 3 plays with players, because if you got this just for solo, I think that's probably exceedingly frustrating at sometimes. But once you play, 2-3 players, I would recommend it. Probably not 4, unless everybody was really in tune to the game. But I would recommend it. It's really fun, solid game. Like I said, the theme, everything kind of all meshes together really good. And I really like how it's presented and laid out. And there's a lot to really chew on here. So definitely recommend Ark Nova. Thanks.